Good day, viewers. Thank you for being here today. My name is Agabwe Kenile Peter. I'm here today to talk to you about environmental management scope and regulation. For our presentation outline, we're going to be looking at we're going to be introducing the environmental management system, that is EMS. We're going to look at what is EMS, and then we're going to see the objectives and then the purpose of the EMS. And furthermore, we're going to look at the framework. We're going to look at how to develop an EMS. And then we look at the environmental aspects and impacts, the scope of EMS. And then we're going to look at ISO 14001. And finally, we'll look at the benefits of EMS and the key EMS requirements. For the intro, what is EMS, Environmental Management System? It is simply that part of an overall management system which includes organizational structure, planning, activities, responsibilities, practices, procedures, processes, and resources for achieving environmental policies. Important EMS elements includes continual improvement, management commitments, formalization, and awareness of system-based approach. System-based approach. And what is the purpose of an EMS? An EMS brings together the people, policies, plans, review mechanisms, and procedures used to manage environmental issues at a facility or in an organization. For the purpose of today's discussion, at the end of this training, you should be able to tell what an EMS is, Environmental Management System is, and what are the benefits of environmental management system, and then the regulation. Next, we'll look at the EMS framework. We have the most widely used and respected framework, which is the international standard ISO 14001. Organizations, however, use many EMS frameworks and models. Now, the implementing instructions directs all organizations to align their EMS program with the internationally recognized ISO 14001. The question now is, what does an EMS look like? How is the EMS structured? Before we go into explaining that, we need to look at the basic EMS framework, and it's in 4 stages, and it's all about the environmental management system follows a plan, do, check, and act cycle. And this is a circular process because it is for continual improvement in which an organization is constantly reviewing and revising the system. The continuous cycle has, of course, four steps. We have the first one as the planning step, and at this very point you try to identify the environmental aspects and then establish a goal. You try to identify the environmental aspects of the organization and establishing goals. As we continue in this discussion, we're going to talk about what the environmental aspect is all about. Then the next stage is the do stage. At this point is the point of implementing, and this would include training and operational control. And these very points you need to train to build the competence with the employee. The third stage is this checking stage. This involves monitoring and corrective action. And finally, the acts. And that is a point where you review, that includes progress reviews, and acting to make needed changes available. And having said this, what are the necessary steps for developing an EMS for an organization? What are the necessary steps for developing an EMS for an organization? The first step is the first step here. The following steps will help to build an effective environmental management system for an organization. We have 5 steps here. The first step is laying the groundwork. We're going to talk about that soon. Developing EMS documentation. The third step is the implementation step. The fourth is checking actions or correcting corrective action. And finally, establishing continuing improvements. Now, let us look at laying the groundwork. What does it mean when we say we are trying to lay the groundwork for the EMS? And laying the groundwork for this very purpose would involve you taking 5 steps. The first step is obtaining management commitments. This step is very important. This is the first step in the ESM building process. At this very step, you gain the top management commitments to supporting the EMS. Management must understand the benefits of the EMS and what it will take to put an EMS in place. Your next action will be to choose a team lead. To choose a team lead for this very process. And what would be the qualification of the team lead? The team lead is a management representative who has the necessary authority for leading the development and implementation efforts, and for serving as liaisons to customers and regulators. To customers and regulators. Then the next step under this ground laying process is forming an EMS team. Forming an EMS team. The team, a team made up of representatives, that team should be made up of representatives from key management functions, productions, and service areas. And the team will identify and assess issues that is peculiar to their areas, also identify the opportunities and the existing process as applicable to them. And the fourth step in this laying of the groundwork is building supports and involving employees. Building support and involving employees. Building support for an EMS by making a presentation. You build this support by making a presentation in your companies, to your company's management and employee on what an EMS is and why the company is developing one. So this presentation should be made before the management of the company and before the employee. And finally, in this ground laying step is conducting a preliminary review. Conducting a preliminary review of all your current environmental programs and systems, and comparing these against the criteria of your EMS. So this, having examined all of these steps, then you can say that we are good to go to the next step of developing this EMS process. And this next step involves the step 2, involves developing EMS, Environmental Management System Documentation. And as touching developing this documentation, this EMS implementation element is addressed here because each EMS element must be documented throughout the development process. And this is a good point to begin an organization of an EMS manual. And that takes us to the first step here under this step 2 is establishing a communication plan. Establishing a communication plan. And the communication is another EMS implementation element. However, communication is an integral part of the EMS development, or with more effective communication, improving the efficiency of your EMS development, and therefore it is necessary to start the process of developing communication procedures at this point to ensure that resources devoted to EMS development and implementations are used effectively. And your next step is you creating an environmental policy statement. An environmental policy statement. The EMS team will begin the process of developing an EMS by writing your company's environmental policy statements and deciding how much you want to spend at the start. Now, this policy will help to focus on priorities of each specific organization. And finally, at this step 2 of the developing the EMS is the planning. Planning is very, very important because it helps. It is during this stage that you formulate a plan to fulfill your environmental policy, and this plan will infuse identifying environmental aspects of your company. Soon we're going to talk about what environmental aspect of your company is all about. And then you need to identify the legal and other requirements. You need to establish objectives and targets. And you also need to develop an environmental management program. And step 3 of the implementation, step 3 is implementation, and it's all about developing the capability and support mechanisms necessary to achieve your environmental policy, objectives, and targets. In order to accomplish this, the first one is develop an operational control to ensure that your environmental policy is followed and that your objectives are achieved. And certain operations and activities must be controlled. Your next step at this stage is develop an emergency preparedness and the response procedure, and followed by designated organizational structure and responsibility, and followed by establishing a document control, and finally training of employee. Once these procedures and other documents have been prepared, you are ready to implement the EMS. As a first step, train your employee on the EMS, especially with regards to environmental impacts of your activities. Any new modified procedure or any new responsibility. So all this, your staff should be aware of modified procedures. Your staff should be aware of new responsibilities. Of taking us to the fourth step of what is required for us to set up an EMS is checking. The checking step, that is where you have the corrective actions. The checking step. After the EMS is set up and running, be sure to assess system performance. Be sure to assess system performance. In order to accomplish this, establish monitoring and measuring a procedure. In order to establish monitoring and measuring procedures, establish a non-conformance and corrective or preventive action procedure, establish a record procedures, establish records procedures, and finally, develop audit procedure. Develop audit procedure. Audits identify the EMS deficiencies so that they can be resolved. Finally, on this step of what is required to set up the EMS is the establishing continuing improvement. And this is very, very important for EMS since it is a circular, since it is a continuous cycle. So there is always establishing, there's always the need to establish continuous improvements. And part of the way this is done is to have a management review. Your management review to ensure success and continuing improvements. Regular reviews of your EMS are needed progress of your EMS and of the environmental programs set up to meet targets. Of the environmental programs that is set up to meet the targets. So with all this in place, you can be assured that a full EMS will be developed. Now we're going to look at what do we mean when we're talking about environmental aspects and environmental impacts. Environmental aspects and environmental impacts. In your organization, what are the environmental aspects to be considered? From the chart we have, from the pictures, we have a picture we have above here. We have the release of emission from this very factory, that is air pollution, energy usage issue, that is fossil fuel depletion, mineral depletion, stormwater, that is water pollution, wastewater discharge, that is also water pollution. You can also have air pollution from transportation. Air pollution from transportation. So all these are some of the environmental aspects to be considered in the organization. And having considered these environmental aspects, now how do you quantify what is the significance of these aspects? What is the severity of the impacts? What is the magnitude of the impact? So in order for you to assess the environmental aspects, to know the significance of each of these aspects, you have a four-step approach to that. You need to know the gravity of the impact, the probability of the impact occurring, what are the legal issues, the national legal issues available as concerning that very environmental aspect, and then what is the business, what are the business objectives? What are the business objectives? So all this, having examined all this, then you can come up with the significance of these environmental aspects. The significance of these environmental aspects. Some basics of environmental aspects and impact and aspects management system. The environmental aspects, that is the elements of an organization's activities, products, services which can interact with the environment. So these environmental aspects can be defined as the activities of an organization or its products or services that can interact with the environment. So it is important to establish, implement, and maintain a procedure to identify the environmental aspects of activities, products, and services that you can control and can influence. And after identifying the environmental aspects, you must determine those which have or can have significant impact on the environment. Examples include air emissions or water discharge, the use of raw water, energy usage, the use of mineral resources, and the use of volatile organic VOCs. For our example, in order to help us to understand what we mean by this environmental aspect and impact properly, let us try to look at the operational phase. We're going to look at the operational phase. So sorry, it's taking some time, but we're getting there. We're going to look at the operational phase of the organization. Okay, first let us look at the environmental impacts, and that is the effects. Environmental impacts, and that is the effects. Any change to the environment, whether adverse or beneficial, wholly or partially, resulting from an organization's activities, products, or service, can be defined as the environmental impacts, or you can say effects. Example of this can be depletion of natural resources, air pollution, hazardous waste generation, water and soil contamination. And now let's see examples of aspects and impacts, environmental aspects and impacts. Now, let's take for instance during the operation phase in an organization, the aspects might be the office use of electronic equipment, and the impacts that may be generated as a result of the use of this electronic equipment might result in the generation of recyclable wastes such as paper, batteries, tuners, and cartridges. Another aspect, environmental aspect that can be associated with the operational phase of an organization is the use of solvents, oil, fluorescent lamps, and excess furniture. And the impact to this might be land contamination, and that is a landfill. Another aspect can be air emissions from buildings, especially industries. Air emissions from buildings, from industries. And this can lead to impacts such as air pollution and the global warming issues. Air pollution and global warming issues. So we have a whole lot of other examples also as regards the operational phase. Another aspect can be the motor vehicle operations, and this might involve probably the use of oil, rags, and then antifreeze, and then tires and batteries. The impact can be the hazardous waste generation and air pollution. Hazardous waste generation and air pollution. And all this. Another aspect can be ground maintenance, and this can bring about the environmental impact of depletion of mineral resources. So having examined what an environmental aspect and environmental impact is all about, the next stage of our discussion is the need for us to look at the scope of environmental management system. The scope of environmental management system. For the environmental management system, I have about 5 bullet points here. In order for you to ascertain the scope of the environmental management system of an organization, the first thing you need to consider is the different levels of the organization. The different levels of the organization. And you also need to look at using existing methodologies to understand the internal and external issues of the organization. And also, in order for you to have a very good scope of the environmental management system of the organization, you need to put into consideration the political setup, the political makeup within that very environment within the country. You need to consider to understand the economic strengths of the organization. You need to also look at some social issues and the technologies, and then you also need to look at the legal and then the environmental issues. And the fourth step is gather input from different functions of the organizations. That is, every areas of the organization, you need to gather inputs from there. Also would help you in scoping the EMS. And finally, you will need to identify internal and then the external issues of the organization. The table below will help us to have an understanding of what the external and internal issues are all about. We have grouped them into three teams: the political issues, we have the economic issues, and we have the social aspect of the organization. And the political part of it might, you might have some external issues such as a change in government. You might have internal issues such as a change in top management governance structure. All these things must be put into consideration. Embargoes and sanctions are also what we need to look at. Political instability, wars, and terrorism. Then for the internal issue, a new owner coming into the setup, a new owner coming into the organization, new ownership arrangements. And you also need to consider the economic issue of the organization. You need to look at the external issue, such as economic upturn and downturn, economic upturn and downturn, currency fluctuation, and the tariff, tax, grants for industries. So these are some external issues that are related to the economy. And then for the internal issues that needs to be studied in the organization is the internal financial processes. The internal financial processes, the payback period, all this needs to be put into consideration. And finally, looking at the social aspect of the organization, the external issue to be considered is the issue of population growth, customer attitudes and opinion, perceived environmental impacts, and you also need to look at internal issues that may be generated, such as environmental culture of the organization. Every organization have their own culture, so you need to examine the internal environmental culture of the organization, and you also need to know the level of literacy, know about the internal restructuring of the organization. So having considered all this, you have a very good idea of how you can scope the EMS of any organization. And the next step is for us to look at the usefulness of ISO 14001. Now, this is a framework, an international framework. It is the most widely recognized environmental management standards. So it is used to, number one, provide assurance to management that are in control of processes and activities having an impact on the environment. It is used to provide assurance to interested parties. The interested parties can be shareholders, stakeholders, or regulators. And ISO 14001 also is used to support environmental protection and preservation of pollution in balance with socio-economic needs. ISO 14001 also builds confidence that one is complying with legislation. Yeah, and what is this ISO 14001 all about? I've summarized it as follow. We're going to look at it in terms of in the context of the organization. From ISO, what is the requirement for organization? That is the first one is understanding the organization and its context. Understanding the organization and its context. So ISO requires that if you are to set up a very good EMS, there is need for you to understand the organization and its context. And how will you achieve that? You need to study the external circumstances associated with this organization. You need to know about their political, regulatory, international, and then their national issues. So you need to understand all of this. You need to also understand the internal characteristics of this organization. You need to find out their strategic direction. You need to find out about their cultures. Yeah, you need to find out about their capabilities. And thirdly, in understanding the organization, you need to find out about their environmental condition that could affect the organization. You need to look at the organization and try to find out what are those environmental components or conditions that can affect the organization, and some such as climate and natural resources availability. So all of this must be put into consideration. In understanding it in the context of the organization, ISO specifies that we need to understand the needs and the expectations of interested parties. Who are the interested parties relevant to the EMS? What are their needs and their expectations? All this must be put into consideration. The next one is determining the scope of the EMS. We've talked about that. And then finally, the next one also, we're going to look at what is ISO saying concerning leadership in the organization. The ISO expects the top management to demonstrate leadership and commitment. Leadership and commitment, and this is by accounting for the effectiveness of the EMS and by ensuring policies and objectives are established, and also in ensuring resources, communicating the importance of the EMS. So all of these are responsibilities of the leadership of the organization as expected of the ISO. The issue of compliance from the leadership is very important. The willingness of the leadership of the organization to protect the environment, and the willingness of the leadership of the organization to continually improve on the existing environmental management system. And the next requirement as touching the planning stage for ISO, actions to address risk opportunities. Risk. ISO also considers action to address risk. So the leadership of the organization should must be determined on this very, very issue of risk involved. And then they need to understand the environmental aspects, the compliance objective, planning the actions, and they need to also look at the environmental objectives and planning to achieve them. The next is support. What are the resources, the competence of the employee? How aware are they? And how is this communicated to them? So all of this must be put into consideration. For the operation, the operational planning and control, emergency preparedness and the response, all this should be in place. Performance evaluation. ISO requires performance evaluation, and performance evaluation will require monitoring, measurements, analysis, and evaluation. And this is to evaluate for, check for compliance. Internal audit is also very important, internal audit program, and then the management review. Internal audit program and management review. And you may want to find out what are the environmental issues. What are the environmental issues? to be considered. The first is you look at the outsourced processes. You look at the planned and unplanned changes. You try to look at the environmental aspects such as waste production, the life cycle, transportation, the end of life disposal. Look at the issue of risk and opportunities. Look at the significance of the impact. I'll try to evaluate the legal requirements and also the potential emergencies. So when you examine all these, then you are trying to find out the basic environmental issues that needs to be addressed and how are they managed. You can manage these issues. You can manage these issues by communicating. You can manage these issues by communicating requests to outsource process and then a contractor. And you can also manage this process by checking the environmental requirement for procurement. The environmental requirement for procurement. You can also check the environmental requirement for the design and development of products and services. Also check the compliance and awareness. And if you want to also manage, you check the operational control, you check the management action to address the issues, check the targets and objectives of the organization, and then check the organization's emergency response plan. And how can they be checked on? You can simply check on each organization's emergency action plan or how their capability in managing the environmental aspects of their organization by conducting environmental management system audits, monitoring measurements, compliance evaluation, and emergency drills. Finally, how are issues fixed and improved? How are issues fixed and improved? Issues are fixed and improved through corrective and appropriate corrective and preventive action. And finally, also through management review. Through management review. Before we end it on our discussion today, we need to finally look at what are the benefits. Having said all this, what are the benefits of an EMS? Properly developed and implemented EMS will provide the following benefits to the operating organization. The first benefit is it helps to enhance compliance. It enhances the image of regulators. It reduces operating costs. Employees' involvement. It reduces accidental environmental impacts and also finally increases efficiency. And as a bottom line, EMS requirements, finally, it is important for top management to be committed to the EMS. It's important for the top management of the organization to be committed to the environmental management system. And an environmental management system does not exist in isolation. It must be consistent with other quality management systems in the organization. Finally, an environmental management system must be owned by everyone in the organization. Thank you very much. I want to thank you for listening.